Now that setup of GL budget IDs and estimate IDs in Sage Intacct Construction is completed, let's have a look at Velixo cost to complete template. Once you launch the template, first thing that you're going to need to do is to connect Velixo with your instance of Sage Intacct. After installation of Velixo is completed, you'll be able to find tab for Velixo NX, but also on your home ribbon, you're going to be able to find this Velixo connection, Velixo NX connection button. Click on it, and here you're going to create new connection. If previously connection has been created, you can edit, provide your credentials again for Sage Intacct and connect to systems. Otherwise, you're going to add new one. So let's edit one that I have previously created. We're going to be logging using Sage Intacct ID. We can click on Remember Credentials, click on Connect. This will launch your Sage Intacct login screen. You're going to provide your company ID, your user ID, and password. Once you log in, Velixo will be connected to your Sage Intacct instance. So let's have a look at the parameters. Let's try to understand what needs to happen here inside Velixo to be able to connect your projects, provide the date, and provide further parameters. First, we're going to drop down a list of your projects. Once connection is established, this list will show your projects from your instance of Sage Intacct. We're going to be forecasting, in this example, as of end of November. So we're going to enter a cutoff date, end of November, and the moment we enter date, pick the project, the system will start refreshing information down below. So in addition to this, we have to look at a couple more parameters. So let's first click on Options tab on the bottom of your spreadsheet. On the Options tab, system will need to pull information that's required to connect it to Excel and Intacct and to provide you with option to have a drop-down menus to feed from your actual Sage Intacct. So to do this, you will have to go to Velixo and you have to click on Refresh All and then do full refresh. What it's going to do, it's going to refresh a list of your cost codes. It's going to retrieve your entity IDs, but it's going to also retrieve your budget IDs. That's what we did in Sage Intacct before starting this exercise. So going to Options, clicking Refresh All, will refresh list of your GL budget IDs and cost types. Now let's talk about default cost type. We are forecasting on a cost code level. However, for the purpose of writing this forecast to the budget, we require to have a default cost type assigned to those transactions. So you can pick any cost type of your choice. And in this case, we picked OTH, stands for other. So our forecast will flow to the budget correctly. Again, not required for any comparative purposes. It's just a form that we have to check in order to get a transaction over. Another feature here that you need to consider is a cost code format. That's related directly to your subtotals. So once you define what your header cost code format is, the system will know how to organize your forecast spreadsheet in order to group your divisions correctly. So in this case, my header record, my division record, it's a 4-digit separated by space. Therefore, on the cost code format, I'm providing that information exactly as it is. And please note, column P will give us a list of all budget IDs set up in previous steps. So let's see how we're going to use that information on a spreadsheet. If you scroll to the right, let me close this pane here. If you scroll to the right, you're going to see in a column S, or in a cell S25, question, should we post this to budget? So if our intention is to post forecast numbers for the GL budget for the purpose of reporting, this one should be answered as a true. So you just simply change a value from false to true. And then system will give you a list or drop down of all budget IDs that you have set up in Sage Intacct in order for you to write forecast to correct date. So we are forecasting for end of November 2022. Therefore, we're going to pick up a GL budget ID 2022-11FC. FC stands for forecast. So with the parameters being entered, our drop-down list refreshed, let's focus on data on our spreadsheet. So you'll see the data, financial data is divided in four groups really. Estimate, original change orders and revised estimate. Then we have our commitments, original posted changes and revised estimate. Then we have commitment invoiced to date with the difference between revised estimate committed invoice being balanced to invoice. And then we have job to date cost. Last cost at completion, we're going to look at this a few minutes from now. Cost to complete, column that's in a light blue. This is your data entry column. So light blue cells are meant for data entry. Cost at completion is a calculation using values from revised contract, job to date cost, and ultimately entries made in your cost to complete. This is a number. This column will be written to Sage Intacct as your forecast for the period. And then you have some variances here, over, under, based on a dollar value and based on a percentage. How are you going to enter your cost to complete? How are you going to calculate? How are you going to speed up this process? Is going to be really up to you. It's Excel spreadsheet, so it can take any formulas, any type of calculations that you'd like to perform here. You can use a simple logic that's typically used for forecasting, where your cost at completion should be greater of revised estimate, or sum of balance to invoice commitments plus job to date cost, or something like that. But ultimately, cost to complete column entry will drive your cost at completion values, and it is cost at completion value that will be written back to Sage Intacct Construction as your forecast for the period. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the first line items. The first one here, which is a $500 for permits, revised estimate, and my job to date cost is the same. Therefore, I'm stipulating my cost to complete will not change. It will remain as it is. Therefore, my cost to completion will remain $500. However, the second line item here, $6,000 revised, job to date cost is $2,000. So to drive my cost at completion, I would have to enter $4,000 here, providing that this cost will not escalate. So my cost at completion basically use a cost to complete as a plug number to arrive to final number. Of course, if I'm entering my cost escalation here and say, you know what, those permits will actually cost me additional $1,000 in what I estimated, so I will take my $5,000 cost to complete plus job to date cost to arrive to new number for cost at completion, and so on. I can also use a simple math here. I can say that my cost to complete will be really difference between my revised estimate and job to date cost. So by plugging that number in, my cost at completion in this case will be equal to my revised estimate. And again, so on. You just continue working down the list. Once you completed cost to complete data entry, and before you're performing your write back, basically sending data to Intacct, you should spot check a few items. First of all, verify your cost at completion value up on the top, which is a total of that column, and compare it to revised estimate and a sum of balance to invoice and job to date cost. Those numbers should be correlated. If you see some huge swings there between those numbers, so it's either a result of your cost truly escalating or maybe potentially some errors. Another thing that you should note here is that any row that's highlighted in a bold letters, it's really subtotal for your divisions. Therefore, your entry should not be made in those spaces. So you make your cost to complete entries on a cost code level. Additional item here that will need checking is when you go back to options, and if you remember earlier in this presentation, we were talking about the default cost type. That default cost type will be used to connect our forecast with the GL budget ID over in a Sage Intacct and its required field. In order for data to flow properly, that cost type should be assigned to every cost code used in a forecast. So as you're setting up your projects, as you're assigning a cost code and cost types of the project, make sure that you always include that the default cost type that you're going to be using for forecasting purposes. Again, in our case is OTH, other. So once your checking is completed, you're going to go back to perform write back under your Velixo NX tab in Excel. Click on it, pick current worksheet, and then observe progress on the right. So you'll see here that progress will be highlighted, and down on the bottom, you can see progress of a write back. The circle will be spinning until you get this green checkbox indicating that write back has been completed. So let's check results over in Sage Intacct. So let's log on to Sage Intacct, and let's pick entity where this project is assigned to. And then we're going to go to projects, all project estimates. Let's look at the estimate first. We're going to filter a list of estimates by project ID. And you'll notice there are two estimates here. First one is original estimate, also known as a primary estimate. And then here it is. This is our forecast, 143,994.54. So if we quickly switch back to our cost at completion column, amounts are matching exactly, 143,994.54. If we edit that estimate, or forecast in this case, you'll notice that cost codes, all of them are coded to cost type other, as per default cost type that we have selected on a spreadsheet, and values are matching. You can definitely sort this by cost code order so you can follow numbers back to your spreadsheet. One additional piece of information that's important here is to check this integrate with the GL drop-down menu. Based on a value that we set up in a spreadsheet where we're saying post to the budget and select budget ID, the system will know to check this box in Intacct and actually pull the GL budget ID that you have selected on a spreadsheet side. It's also very important that it's going to pick a period of estimate date as a GL budget ID date for posting this estimate or forecast rather throughout the system. Now let's check the GL budget. So if you go to GL, budget repository, and if you look at budget ID 2022-11FC, you can click on budget details and you'll notice that all line items from that cost at completion forecast are now part of the GL budget and therefore available for reporting throughout Sage Intacct. Now that we reviewed posting of forecast cost at completion over to Intacct, we can continue with this work by following future forecasts. So let's have a look how to forecast for the next month and yet keeping information for previous months in the system unchanged. So beauty of this solution is that it can keep track of virtually unlimited number of forecasts by period and store those in your historical repository of forecasts for comparative purposes. So we are now moving into the next month, and let's say we're forecasting for month ending December 31st, 2022. Previous one was end of November, so we're going to be forecasting now end of December. Let's see what we need to do to make this happen. First of all, we'll pick a project ID, same as we did before. We're going to enter cutoff date. Cutoff date will impact our cutoff for job to date cost. And then we're going to say, okay, we want to write this one now back to Intacct as well, keep it for historical purposes, and we're going to write it to GL budget ID 2022-12 FC. So with that being decided, we're going to go to the one more step here. You'll notice there's a column here, column M, called last cost at completion. Purpose of that column is to bring a previous forecast on the spreadsheet just for comparative purposes. So as you're providing your cost to complete and cost at completion is calculated, you can reference to any one of those previous forecasts that you have previously posted to Intacct. So how to do this? You would have to go back to Intacct, find that estimate ID, that last one that you entered. So in our case, it was estimate ID 52, I believe. You're going to take that number and basically populate it here on this cell. You're just going to copy in that paste number or enter that number here, estimate ID, and it will populate the column down below. So back in Intacct, this is our last estimate. It's estimate 52. That's my estimate ID. I'm going to copy this value and simply paste it in my above my last cost at completion cell here. The moment I do that, the system will basically retrieve values from that estimate ID and give me option to compare my previous cost at completion to cost completion as I'm entering here now. So let's do that. I can simply go down numbers. My first item will not change. My last one will go to, there's a $3,000 there to complete, and so on. You will just continue entering your cost to complete, end of the period, December 31st, 2022. You'll also notice that system will now taking in consideration some precedents. So for instance, on this particular line, we have revised estimate to be 7128. However, our job to date cost is greater than a revised estimate. Therefore, my cost at completion will be reflective of that. Once we finish with the cost to complete entries for month of December, we're going to repeat same steps. We're going to click on Perform Write Back. perform write back on a current worksheet, and wait for the process to be completed. So let's check back in Intacct. If we go back to our estimates, just going to refresh the screen to see new estimate or new forecast. So this is our forecast for month of December. This is a new value of cost at completion. You can go to edit and you can see that all line items are here. And now it's posted to GL budget ID 2022-12FC, and it's going to use period of estimate date as a posting date. If we go back to the budget repository in GL, we will be able to find details behind budget 2022-12FC, and you'll see that all line items are there.